sponsored by Mr. Elias Saal and family, Le'ilui Nishmat, his beloved mother, Yenta Bat Bluma Saal Aleha Shalom, as well by Ezra Zuri and Fortuna Atiye, Le'ilui Nishmat, her beloved father, Cesar Ezra Ben Fortune, Alav Shalom. Iratzon that to the words of Torah today, both Neshamot have an Aliyah in Gan Eden. Amen. Today, I'd like to discuss maybe 3 or 4 topics, time allowing, and I'll start with perhaps something that is about to happen in a few hours. As we all know, this week we switched the clock. So always comes the topic and the question about early Shabbat. So I'd like to discuss just for a few minutes the concept of early Shabbat and the minimum or basic halachot which are applicable for this new schedule. So we know that there is such a concept in the halakha that a person is allowed to do arvit during the daytime. This is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which explains the topic of plag hamincha. What does it mean? If you look in the calendar, which I have next to me, you have different concepts of time. One it's called midday. The other one it's called minha gedolah, the earliest minha, which for example today will be at 2 o'clock. Then you have minha ketana. Minha ketana is approximately 2.5 hours before sunset. Now, this minha, in this concept of 2.5 hours, the middle point of this time between sunset and the late minha, it's called plag haminha, the partition or the part of the minha. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, and this is the foundation of the Sephardic tradition, and perhaps the Ashkenazic tradition as well, to welcome the Shabbat early, as well as doing arbit during the week from the plag haminha. In the winter, I don't believe that this early minyan and late minyan is really a reality for Shabbat, since a person needs to have enough time to prepare. But in the summer, like now, that sunset is at 7:30, many people don't want to wait to pray that late. So synagogues offer 2 minyanim, the early minyan and the late minyan. But whatever synagogue you are, the Kabbalat Shabbat cannot be started before the plag hamincha. That also brings the question of candlelighting. Does it mean that because the wife accepts the husband rather says Kabbalat Shabbat in the synagogue and is praying Arvit, it means that automatically his wife is bounded on this matter? So the short answer is that according to the Sephardic tradition, following the ruling of Hacham Batya Yosef, the wife does not accept the Shabbat automatically when the husband is praying Arvit at the synagogue, but she receives Shabbat by the time she does the candle lighting. So therefore, from a Sephardic perspective, the husband can pray in the early minyan tonight, but when he comes home, the wife must make sure that the candles are lit before the kiddush starts. Otherwise, it creates a confusion in the home, etc., and other halachic matters. On the Ashkenazic tradition, I believe that the ruling is a bit different, the way I remember that from the past, that according to the Ashkenazic tradition, Ishto kegufo. The wife eats like the husband, so therefore, whenever the husband receives Kabbalat Shabbat, that is the time that the wife needs to do the candle lighting. But as I always say, I'm only creating an awareness of the halachic conscientiousness that we must have when we do the early Shabbat or the regular Shabbat, in order to act accordingly, in order to plan accordingly, and as I always say, make sure that we are the ones that welcomes the Shabbat and not Haz v'Shalom, the Shabbat welcomes us. So therefore, that takes care of the early minyan. If you have any question in this matter, check with the LOR, that's Rashi Tevot for local Orthodox rabbi. The next topic I'd like to discuss today is the essence of this Shabbat. And there are two parts of this Shabbat. Today Shabbat, Vayikra, and next Shabbat. So halachically, from a halacha perspective, next Shabbat, it's Shabbat Hagadol, because it's the Shabbat closest to Pesach, and this is the Shabbat that, according to the Syrian tradition, and it all depends who you ask, is when we read a special haftarah of dealing with Mashiach's arrival, but we'll save that belly nether for next week. Maybe Mashiach comes between Mosai Shabbat and next Friday, so we'll listen to him directly. But if not, we'll take a rain check for next Friday, belly nether. But there is one essential component that this Shabbat must contain. And this is the derasha of the Shabbat HaGadol by the rabbis of the community. Shabbat HaGadol, it's usually the Shabbat closer to Pesach. The Shabbat that precedes Pesach, it's called Shabbat HaGadol because that was the day of the miracle of the Korban Pesach on a Shabbat. And there is a concept from Halakha that the rabbis give a special class in honor of Pesach to the entire community. And there are different traditions depending where the person lives. Some synagogues, they do it Shabbat morning. Most synagogues do it Shabbat afternoon. And perhaps some synagogues do it on Mosai Shabbat. But our tradition has always been to do it Shabbat afternoon. Another reason why this derasha is called derasha of Shabbat HaGadol is because this is one of the few times that the rabbi cannot be short in the class that they give, that the speech of the rabbi must be longer than usual. Why? Because the purpose of the derasha of Shabbat HaGadol is to create an awareness to the community, to the congregation rather, concerning the upcoming holiday of Pesach. And holiday of Pesach, as we know very well, has so many components. It's not only matzah shemura, it's not only the wine or the haroset or the maror. That's all relevant to the seder and to food. But you have the concept of kashering dishes, you have the concept of kasherizing appliances, or perhaps in some cases replacing certain items. So that's part of the concept of the drasha of Shabbat HaGadol, to review basic halachic requirements so the person can have Pesach kasher besameach. We say Pesach kasher besameach, which at this moment, as I'm telling you this, I remember something that we learned maybe a year ago, and I'll say it now because I think it's apropos. Now, why do we say Pesach kasher besameach? So I think that the literal meaning of that sentence means, let it be the holiday of Pesach, Passover, kasher, let it be kosher, because as I said before, not only the mitzvah of eating matzah, but also the mitzvah of removing the hametz and destroying the hametz and selling the hametz and cleaning all the hametz and getting rid of it. And so we need to have the kosher element of the holiday, and once the kosher element of the holiday, also it reminds us, remember that in Pesach you must be happy. Besamachta v'chagecha v'ha'ita ach sameach. The pasuk writes, you will rejoice in the holiday and will only be happy. Many times the preparations for Pesach can overwhelm a person. And usually the wife, the queen of the home, but also husbands, and I'm sure that every husband without exception is lending a hand to the home, kasherizing, dipping in the mikveh, grocery, whatever, cooking. Unless your wife asks you, I think stay away from the kitchen like I do. Unless I'm being asked, I'll step into the plate. But I'm a good helper, by the way. And I follow orders, hopefully, the proper way. But in a different concept, I'd like to share something that I believe that we discussed a year ago from the Be'er HaChaim. And the Bera Haim says that the word Pesach, usually in English, we say Passover. That's the meaning of the word Pesach, of skipping, passing over the house of an Egyptian, the house of a Jew, the house of an Egyptian. That's the passing over, skipping. But Bera Haim says, why do we call it Hag Pesach? Why don't we say Hag Masot? Hag Masot kasher besameach. So the short answer is, if we're going to say only Hag Masot, we are limiting the essence of Pesach. We are insinuating that Pesach is only matzot, and Pesach is not only matzot. Pesach is the presence of the matzah and the absence of the hames. But the ultimate absence of the hames is not only in the food department, is our neshama, our being, etc., which we'll tackle that in a few minutes. But the Bera Haim says, you know why it's called Hag Pesach? Because Pesach has a different meaning than just Passover. Pesach means pe, the mouth, sah, conversation. The conversation of the mouth should be kasher. Not only the food that goes in should be kasher, but the words that come out should be kasher. And what is the benefit of speaking in a kosher way? Besameach. You are guaranteed happiness in your life. What a beautiful hidush from the Bera Haim in this matter. Who would have thought that Pesach is also about the power of speech? And that's why we learn, and we always get new sources, and we become very fascinating to be able to have access to beautiful writings of our great Hachamim of the generation and enable us to share it with the Kahal. Now, can you imagine that Pesach is not only what goes in, but Pesach now is also what goes out? Can you imagine the level of happiness that we, individually and collectively, can achieve throughout the entire year? Throughout the entire year, by speaking in the proper way. What a beautiful, beautiful hidush. Comes the Moed Kol Hai, and is also brought down by the Kaf Haim and many others. And it says that there is an added benefit to come to the rabbi's class tomorrow. And you may ask, says, Rabbi, why do I need to sit in a class for an hour and a half? By us is an hour and a half, because all year long is an hour. So to give the ime, to give the kavod to the Pesach Shabbat Gadol, the Rasha, we go a bit longer. But why do we make such an emphasis in this concept? You know what it says in the Moed Kol Hai? שבזמן שהחכם דורש, הקדוש ברוך הוא מוחל עוונותיו של הקהל. You know, you may say, but Rabbi, what are you going to teach me different from a year ago to a year now? You have no idea how many different things are happening this year that they didn't happen last year. Besides the fact of the Shabbat preceding Pesach, how do we proceed? And this was one of the most frequent questions that we have been getting through Ask the Rabbi class and during the day, daily. Rabbi, how do we do next Shabbat? So come tomorrow to the Knis and you'll hear it, how you're going to do next Shabbat. How do I kasher this? Come to the class and you'll hear it. This is besides the fact that people get, at least our synagogue does, sends a bulletin which is available online in the website of the synagogue, www.ejsfl.com, and you have there lots of kashering and step-by-step of the Seder, and even a link to the beautiful guide to the JSOR, and obviously via itorah.com, my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Eli Shalita Mansour, provided to the world a fascinating step-by-step halachot. So Baruch Hashem, the resources are there. Excuse me. But many times, people don't have access, or don't understand, or don't know how to follow the orders, etc. So you come to the synagogue and you listen to the drasha. But there is one added benefit, and I said it in Hebrew, and I did not translate it until this second. And the language that it says verbatim is, שבשעה שהחכם דורש, that in the moment that the rabbi gives a speech, הקדוש ברוך הוא מוחל עוונותיהם של הקהל. God erases the transgressions of the community, of the congregation. Can you imagine? You come to your rabbi class, or you come here to the class, and you are listening to the class, and suddenly averot are being erased from your account and my account. Don't think that I'm such a tzaddik. I also have an account of averot. I hope I have low balance, but as a person, and I know myself, I do have an account there as well. Now what is the reason that because you came to a Torah class and Hashem is erasing averot? Even now, let's be honest here. Even now, you're listening at home, okay? But let's explain about the Shabbat. First of all, the fact that we have an hour and a half class, it means that you are resting an hour and a half less because you come to the synagogue. But as we know very well, the reward for coming to the synagogue is not only, oh, I slept an hour less, so therefore I have an hour credit. That's for sure. But you also have the sechar of coming. And then you have the sechar of sitting. And then you have the sechar of listening. So guess what? It's a great investment and benefit for all of us, individually and collectively, to attend the classes given by the Hachamim. And Baruch Hashem, I'm sure that all my friends and colleagues, each one on their synagogue, is preparing to share with the Kahal beautiful insights, etc. So somebody asked me if I'm going to give another derasha next Shabbat afternoon. So the short answer is, we are going to have a class next Shabbat afternoon. Although next Shabbat, the schedule, it will be a bit different because you got to finish tefillah in the morning early, go home, finish eating the hametz for the Saudah of Shabbat morning, and you have the deadline of time. Then you got to flush down the toilet, the leftover crumbs, and then say Kal Hamira. Then you got to do Mincha Gedolah. You got to do the prayers that usually are said after Mincha on Erev Pesach. Then you need to go home for Saudah Shelishit. And then you come home for the class in the afternoon and to Kabbalah and Motzei Shabbat, which is the first night of Yom Tov. So there's going to be an action plan, because don't forget that part of the class of next Shabbat afternoon before Yom Tov starts, because we cannot eat Saudah Shelishit late, being Yom Tov. You have to finish Saudah Shelishit early, and there is no bread, there is no matzah, can eat matzah, but there is whole loss of the Seder. So there is what to say in honor of Shabbat HaGadol 1 and Shabbat HaGadol Derasha number 2. So I think that this covers the particulars of this Shabbat. So I repeat, wherever you may be, go to your synagogue and make sure to have a Derasha of Shabbat HaGadol. Now we have another topic that I would like to discuss, and is the Perashah of today. A bit of the Perashah, it's very important. Yes, we dedicated this week to a beautiful amount of insights and halachot and beautiful messages for this holy day of Pesach coming up, Be'ezat Hashem, a week from now, but also is Perashat Ba'ikra. And we mentioned before, the makam for this Shabbat is makam rast. Rast means head. And because Va'ikra, Perashat Va'ikra, is the head of the third Chumash, that is the reason why we say this makam for this particular Shabbat. But I'd like to discuss a moment the parasha of today. So everyone knows that the parasha of today, Vayikra el Moshe, God called Moshe Rabbeinu, it has a miniature aleph. Letters in the Sefer Torah, they are usually uniform, but there are exceptions to this statement. There are certain letters that are enlarged and certain letters which are minimized. And in this week's Torah portion, open the Chumash, you'll see it right away. The first word of Chumash Vayikra, which is the word Vayikra el Moshe, the Aleph of Vayikra has a miniature Aleph. And the question is, why? So we can look at the Mefarshim in these particular matters right here. So the word Vayikra comes from the word kara. Kara means to call. So this sentence is telling us that God called Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not the same thing that Moshe Rabbeinu turned to Hashem. Like God is calling you. Imagine, I'm going to bring an example. Let's say that someone very important, you need to speak to this very wealthy person or this very important person. And there are two ways of communication. You call him or he calls you. That you call God, okay, we all do it. But when God calls Moshe, and God says to Moshe, Moshe, I want you to write the following. Vayikra el Moshe, I call you. Moshe refused. Moshe was so humble that he wanted to say Vayikar. Vayikar means a chance. A chance. Literally. A chance. In other words, happened to be walking by. Or they cross each other to a certain extent. And they talked. This was Moshe Rabbeinu's will. God says, I'm not asking you what to do. I'm telling you what to do. Vayikra. Moshe listens to God. I say, okay, God, this is what you want. Vayikra, small aleph. Can go back. What to do. Vayikra. Moshe listens to God. I say, okay, God, this is what you want. Vayikra, small aleph. Can go. Vayikra, it fills the purpose. God called Moshe with a small aleph. This is the reason why, how do we say this? This is the reason why, how do we say this? The Torah brings the aleph as a small. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, everybody agrees. Perhaps And there are a few tzaddikim in history that this midah was part of their personality. For example, Shmuel, for example, David, even Mordechai Tzaddik. So let's quote some of the sources. And this is, if you remember, the Ramban, the Nachmanides letter that he sent to his son. One of the upper sentences, right in the beginning of the letter, says, Ramban, the Nachmanides letter that he sent to his son. One of the upper sentences, right in the beginning of the letter, says that Midata Anava, the humility character trait, is probably the best midah that a person can develop through life. And also the Gemara in Megillah says, Bedavid hua katan. David was the small one. What does it mean? Katan bekatnuto mitehilato ad sofo. It says, like David HaMelech, as a young man, he will, I don't want to say nullify himself, even when he became the king, he remained the same humble person. I remember many years ago in one of the classes that we had on the book of Shmuel, we learned how David HaMelech used to have behind the door in his inner chamber the garments of the days that he was a shepherd. And why he kept them? To always to remind and many others, they all say in a way a similar fashion. To be humble when you are a average person, okay. But when you become someone, if it's someone with wealth, or if it's someone in a community position, or Baruch Hu. And it brings here a very fascinating concept from Megillat Esther. If you remember, the last pasuk of the Megillah says, Ki Mordechai Yehudi Mishneh LaMelech Ahashverosh. It says Mordechai Yehudi was the second to the king. Yani you say Ahashverosh, next Mordechai. Shalom lechol zar'o, and yet he was able to interact peacefully to all of Am Israel. I know what it says. והיה אומר שלום לכל זרעו, לכל ילד בילד. Even to the children, he will stop by of Am Israel. I know what it says. והיה אומר שלום לכל זרעו, לכל... Fascinating. The last chapter of Gemara Berachot talks about the topic of dreams. So it says the Gemara in Berachot, En mar'in delu'in b'halom. Topic of dreams. So it says the Gemara in Berachot, En mar'in delu'in b'halon, ela mishehu yireh shamayim bechol kocho. If a person has a dream about all matters of life, you will not dream about a pumpkin unless the person has a certain level of yirat shamayim. Because the whole idea is based on avodah zarah, on idolatry and murder and all colorful, unfortunate matters. But their motto is, besides all the witchcraft elements and skeletons and crazy things, one of the key components of this Goyish celebration colorful, unfortunate matters, but their motto is, besides all the witchcraft elements and skeletons and crazy things, one of the key components of this Goyish celebration is the pumpkin. Why the pumpkin? Because it's the biggest vegetable out there. Kadosh Baruch Hu yoter gedula bechavod, the more God blesses you with honors and respect and greatness. Kach Moshe did not feel comfortable that he is being called by God. But is this the first time in the Chumash that God calls Moshe?